Yo guys, welcome to the Zelda fiction. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got neglected and becomes the highest supreme emperor? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. In retrospect, maybe doing mundane chores wasn't so bad after all, he thought. He'd gotten the language down over the past 2 months, but the land was just so different. There wasn't any electricity, power, or machinery he was used to. People here still used a fireplace and collected water from the stream. But doing the most mundane of chores, tearing out weeds, delivering things, helping the farm, setting fences. It brought back a familiarity of the old D-rank missions. He smiled at that. Once he maybe hated those, but now he longed for those days again. His recent attempts at sailing off had not gone well. The ship he was gifted with sunk and he had to run back, thank God for water walking. Hey Mingren, come over here, dinner's ready, the fisherman's daughter, Zhuzi called out. She was around his age, older by about a year or two. There was another thing too. They'd taken to calling him Mingren. He'd written Naruto down in kanji down for them since that was the only script they shared. They'd instantly started calling him Mingren. Apparently that was how Naruto was pronounced here. The food here was okay. The people here didn't have ramen. He missed ramen. He missed his friends, he missed Pervy Sage, he missed Granny Tsunade, he missed Konoha, heck he even missed the fox. The Nine Tails hadn't spoken in ages even when he visited to demand answers. These days, he'd always hide in the recesses of his mind. Content to not do anything. Not even trying to corrupt him. Hey Mingren, food will get cold and Dad'll worked hard on it, Zhuzi said. You thinking about your home again? Yeah, he said. Miss home, he said clumsily. It's okay, I'm sure they're out there. One day, you'll be able to find them, I'm sure of it, she says enthusiastically. Zhuzi was weirdly friendly to him. He thinks it may have something to do with the fact that he was the only one around her age. Every other kid was under 5. Shangxi village wasn't big in the first place either, so he was the only friend around her age. He smiled softly. Yeah, he was feeling a bit hungry. This village was nice, it was peaceful here. The people were simple yet kind. Something old man Hokage would have wanted to see. Couple days later, they rode into town. Soldiers on horseback in gleaming armor and carrying swords and spears. They were demanding soldiers, conscripts. He could understand the gist of things. Shangxi wasn't a big place, but it did have able-bodied men. He was confused, of course, didn't these nations have their own shinobi forces? Why did they need ordinary people to fight for? He asked his scholar friend. He just gave him a weird look, confused what he was talking about. It was a strange thing, soldiers here weren't stealth specialists, assassins, nor espionage agents. There were separate classes for those. So like samurai from the land of iron. What on earth is samurai? They discussed in hushed tones when a few soldiers came up to them. You two look like able-bodied men, come with me, he said. His keen ears heard whispers behind him that told him why they approached. These soldiers had a quota to fill and Shangxi was the last village in the county. I'm a student of the Rainwater Academy, you can't conscript me, his scholar friend quickly said. Hence these men turned towards him. No, he's just a kid, Zhuzi cried out. She felt a protective love over him, almost like an elder sister. He was always a bit small for his age, so that may have been the case. The soldiers made a bad remark and moved to push her away. Then he reacted. He was sluggish and out of practice, but he was still a shinobi. Defeating ordinary people was child's play. They fled after that, but not before yelling out profanities and words of vengeance. That evening, Zhuzi comforted him while the village discussed among themselves what to do. He didn't need to hear them to see their intentions. And so the cycle begins, the fox who hadn't heard in months spoke up again. He'd seen those expressions before. They wanted him to leave. Retreating to within the recesses of his bedroom. Naruto contemplated what Turanju had reported. His fingers drummed his chair's armrest as he was stuck in thought. The southern realms had always been a problem. His greatest rival during the Unification Wars, Ingjun rules Qin and Chu, had always been a little rowdy. But both provinces were never discontent and in fact supported him. The Gaotai Emperor glared at the reflection of himself in his room. "I've been here too long," he said. He did not mean staying in Huaxia, not at all. Rather, he meant the long time he'd stayed within the walls of Weijin. When was the last time he left? When was the last time he visited the southern realms? For a man who'd achieved longevity as a true person grand sage, Naruto did not worry about time. His perception of time was a bit skewed because of this. He eyed the small medallion he held in his right hand. It was a silver circular medallion with the carvings around it resembling a coiling dragon surrounding an amethyst jewel. He contemplated activating it. No, she's still pregnant, he decided against it and hovered the medallion back onto the shelf. I will wait for Turanju's report, he decided. The Shadow Pan. An ancient order forged by the 4 August Celestials, gods of Huaxia. The divine deities hand-picked orphans, children as young as a month old, and took them in for training. It was they that protected Huaxia from the shadows. The matters of court intrigue and fighting between nobles, clans and states did not bother them. The wars between dynasties did not rouse them. Nay, their sacred duty was always to defend against cults of chaos and foreign invaders. The Shadowlands, the gods of Ind, the demons of chaos, alien gods, these were among those they dealt with. But things changed a decade ago. The Shadow Pan Master, an ancient expert who'd lived to see 5 centuries, met someone proven worthy by the August ones. Rather, he met 2 someones who proved worthy. 2 who competed against one another, with one ultimate victor triumphing and being enthroned as Emperor Gaotai, the highest supreme. Turanju remembers that man well. His direct superior and one who the Shadow Pan now served, Xuanhua Mingren. Vacation, he said. Nothing big will happen, he said, Turanju scoffed. As if, he leapt from roof to roof, tracing the faint traces of magic left behind. The ones he was tracking were very skilled. Even lesser members of the Shadow Pan would miss them. But Turanju was no lesser member. He was ranked in the 12 heavenly lords, among the best Huaxia had to offer. His footsteps made no sound. His figure was indistinguishable as a shadow among shadows. His speed, faster than the eye can see. He arrived at an abandoned temple. One that, from the looks of it, it was once dedicated from the old gods of Huaxia. It was located a few thousand kilometers outside of Nanchen, further inwards towards the central lands of Chu. He snuck in regardless, gods long dead were often left forgotten. These abandoned temples were dime a dozen. The place was dusty from a lack of use. It was fairly out of the way too, which would explain the lack of repurposing. Turanju hid in the shadows observing his surroundings. Iconographies of birds were found in this place. Not the southern August one, but in the shape of a crow. One shaped with 3 legs. Turanju wrinkled his nose in disgust. He recognized the symbols around these temples. Though not big, it was once dedicated to the sun crow, a god of fire and the radiant sun. The foul taint of foreign sorcery infecting this place fueled his anger. In the dead of night, he entered the main shrine. The place of worship had long fallen from a lack of use. Incense containers knocked over, idols broken down, platforms full of dust and cobwebs. Turanju stared into the chamber. He placed a hand on his mouth and blew. The gust of wind traveled in the color of blue light, dancing like flames. Reveal yourselves, Turanju chanted. His mystical abilities washed away the cloak of dust, revealing clean if old wooden tiles. The Shadow Pan Master placed his palm on the tiles. The tiles transformed. Time seemed to flow backwards and the swirling ripples of the yin and yang hovered over. The illusions of ash appeared before Turanju's eyes. Ash made to disappear by magic now restored through the eyes that peers through time. This was recent, Turanju muttered, walking up to the ash. He bent down and felt his hand through the illusionary ash, funneling chi through it. It was tangible though only within the confines of the spell. He took a whiff of it before instantly dropping it and undoing the spell. Human ash, he spat. Discharge of strong magics. Sacrifices, human sacrifices. He placed his fingers on the back of his neck. Shadow pan, to me, he commanded. The thing with the shadow pan was that because they were so elite, their numbers were very limited. The total amount of agents they had left after the latest demon invasion were less than 100. What's more, because of the North's proximity to the Chaos Plains, the majority of their members hovered north. The South was deemed low priority as the military heavily regulates the borders of both IND and the Shadowlands. Turanju was only able to scrape together a dozen or so agents to continue his search. Within the next several days, they made more and more headways in search of more clues to the infiltration of Huaxia. While Turanju was away searching, Natsuo, unaware of the investigation, continued to enjoy his meal at the banquet Lord Yi hosted in Nanchen. A day after the hunt, the city lord had graciously decided to host a bandit to celebrate the princes. As such, the prince's goodwill towards Lord Yi grew. Much of his initial displeasure had almost been forgotten. Lord Yi watched the boy dragon from the sidelines, allowing him to hog all the attention. He hid his disgust well. Mere beast. First a foreigner emperor and his heirs a beast, he bitterly thought. Your Majesty, why didn't you press on? Now we're ruled by these things. It disgusted him to ally with a foreign cult, it truly did. But if it meant liberating Chu from the pretender then he'd do it. Ever since the pretender took the throne, misery had stricken the land. Demons poured in from the north for an entire year, striking the south for the first time since the days of the Empire of Dawn. His lands were ripped asunder. If it had not been for the foreigners' brutal usurpation of the status quo, would the dark gods of the far north have really struck them as hard? No, they wouldn't have, for thousands of years they were content skirmishing the northern states. The south had remained beautiful and free. Even the Shadowlands don't wander in often if at all. Lord Yi loved Chu. He loved Huaxia. But the current Huaxia was not the one he grew up with. Not the one he loved. Free education. Costly renovations. Sending men into the meat grinder that were the 5 forts of the bastion. Ridiculous. He'd do anything for his people to not suffer fighting those things again. The memory of his last foe still haunted him. His magic was useless, his martial arts harmless. That monstrous bird demon with 2 heads. Its 4 eyes flashing in chaotic magic so keen on destroying him. He still had nightmares about the incident. The explosions, the bombardment, the claws that held him. We're in danger, the voice of his allies suddenly reached him. He briefly panicked before calming down. He still, however, eyed the figures of Lu Han and the celestial dragon guards wearily. He then remembered the man was a martial god but not a particularly magically attuned one. He was an expert on the physical applications of qi, not the magical ones. How? He asked mentally. Don't know, several of our old abandoned sites were rummaged. Don't know who's doing so. Whoever it is, they're coming close. We're already on the move, they replied. Lord Yi took a bite of his food and savored the flavor. Mentally, he counted to communicate. How are you all going along on the ritual? He asked. We've made very good progress but it's still not enough. The sacrifices aren't fulfilling enough for our god to awaken. We'll need to take drastic measures at this rate, they replied. Lord Yi could hear the frustration in their voice. You aren't touching the gifted talents, he spat. They're the future of Huaxia, not food for your god sorcerer. They will if need be. We're out of time. Your nation's men have discovered us too early, they growled back. On the surface, Lord Yi enjoyed chatter and the meal. He was friendly and amicable to the nobles present. He'd even struck a conversation with the prince. Eyeing the prince, the revelation that he was a dragon came to him. Previously, he'd thought it was a rumor, as had most nobles in the south. Matters of the imperial court were of no interest to him. That foreign emperor had already shown his stance when he made his capital as north as physically possible. Why should they care if he didn't? Fantastical tales of the Sun Dragon Prince, mere hearsay. But it seems he was wrong. You just need a powerful sacrifice, right? He asked. We need lots of sacrifices, those strong in the arcane forces are most ideal. Usage of chi, you uncouth barbarian, Lord Yi secretly thought. Would a magical beast do? He asked. No, they won't. Animals don't know the first thing about harnessing arcane forces. Our gods demand those talented in magic, not monsters, they sounded almost insulted. What about a noble beast capable of human form and able to perform advanced lores of magic? A beast taught in the ways of the 8 trigrams. What manner of beast are you saying? A dragon, right here in Nanchen sits a dragon, Lord Yi said. Good joke. Those winged beasts of Valyria aren't suitable for our god. They are of one family with our god, his true children, it will be blasphemy, they spat. Not those drakes. I speak of dragons, he grinned out. You speak of the cloud serpents, they said. Lord Yi made sure to take a huge bite of meat at that exact moment. Otherwise, others may realize he was grinding his teeth in anger. There were a few moments of silence before he received another response. If the legends hold true, then yes they could work, they said. One stays in Nanchen right now, hurry back before he leaves, Lord Yi said. Who is it? Prince Yang, he confirmed. Fuck, that will be difficult, they all but screamed. You expect us to get past the god of war? One of the 12 heavenly lords. You're being rooted out, right? Do you have any other ideas? Lord Yi sneered. Besides, we don't need to kill him. We just need to distract him, right? Just arrive in Nanchen, speed is the most important. The other side chuckled. Heh, to think you'd sacrifice the sacred animal of your land. I will do anything for Huaxia, he said. Change must occur to restore Huaxia. I can make the trip in 2 days. Keep the prince there until then, they said before cutting off. Will do, Lord Yi peered at Natsuo who'd begun retiring for the night. Auspicious or not, beasts have no right ruling the realms of men, he then began pondering ways to keep the prince in Nanchen for a little while longer. The midday sun blared in the cloudy blue sky. Birds were chirping, farmers were working, soldiers were training, shadow pans investigating. Standing in an abandoned campsite, the dozen agents rummaged through the remains. The few shadow pan agents were speechless. The scorched remains they stood in front of were very fresh. Perhaps just a few days old in fact. Turunju stood before the cages with a deep look of sadness. The interior contents were emptied. But based on the chains, the bowls, and the marks all over, it wasn't hard to guess what these were for. Turunju sighed. Damn, how could we miss this? Hundreds of people disappear each in each state never to be found again, my lord. It is a reality, one of the shadow pan said. We were negligent. Turunju walked back to where the pyre had been set. The burnt remains hadn't even been cleaned. A reconstruction used by the water trigram had allowed him to identify the victims as common peasantry of a young healthy age. These people were taken from their homes, kidnapped and sacrificed by some sick sorcerers. Though it seemed that they were close to finding them. The sorcerers had clearly caught on to their activities. They weren't even careful this time. The Shadow Pan leader peered northwestwards, towards the location of Nanchen. Life signature indicates they're heading that way, one of his assistants said. Looks like Lord Yi has indeed turned traitor. Should we call out brothers to investigate Zhangjiao? Possibly, Turunju said. He handed one of the lesser Shadow Pan members a medallion. Notify Lord Lu, I'll contact the Emperor. The other Shadow Pans grimaced. His Majesty won't like this elder brother. He cherishes peace above all else. This'll make him furious. Turunju meanwhile brought out the medallion that communicated to the Emperor. Your Majesty, I have news, he said. It's the middle of court, if it's urgent, draw a formation circle and contact me that way, Naruto said on the other end. Taranju nodded and walked to a clearing. He drew a formation circle with the yin and yang along with the 8 trigrams. Then he added unique carvings on all sides to complete his communication ritual. He then took a position on his knees as a projection of the imperial court came to view. Splinters and rubble tumbled onto the wooden floor. Their noises echoed through the grand heavenly pavilion. Ruins from the right armrest of the dragon throne. Rows of ministers gulped. Even the celestial dragon guards were tenser than usual. These men and women were sweating, something they rarely did. Naruto sat upon the dragon throne with a furious look on his face. His blue eyes blazing with fury and his whiskers made him appear all the more intimidating. A hologram of Taranju kowtowed before him. Behind the Shadow Pan leader were a dozen other Shadow Pan leaders who kept their positions in a kowtow. How did they get in? Naruto all but growled. Yet his voice maintained a regal tone of force. It was similar yet dissimilar to how the Hokage did things. Every bit of his words had a weight to them. Kushina, who was permitted to watch from the side, grimaced uneasily. She had never seen her son so angry before in the year she'd known him. Perhaps when he first laid eyes on her and her husband, but never afterwards. Naruto seemed to either always carry an air of superiority much like the clan heads once did. He wasn't your equal, he was your superior, he was your ruler. When he spoke you listen, no ifs, ands, or buts. It was only in the presence of his friends or his lonesome, this mask would drop. She wanted to say she had gotten to know him well, but she couldn't. She could only wish her stubborn husband were here. But Minato's guilt had not permitted him to stay as she had hoped. Gallivanting to the front lines like the reckless hero he was. We aren't sure exactly how, Taranju reported. The previous reports he gave just now was shocking to the court. Even more so for Naruto. It angered the young emperor more than anything had done in the past few years. Magicians traveling from the Shadowlands weren't strictly prohibited. But they were heavily monitored and entered into a registry. This was a necessary precaution due to the nature of unsanctioned magic. To protect Huaxia, Naruto did not stop these rules. In fact, he reinforced them with more checkpoints and staff. Huaxia was his sacred treasure, his dream of peace brought to life. So to hear something so depraved as human sacrifices, kidnapped from the very civilians of Huaxia. It truly made the emperor's blood boil. Young men, women, and children. Bodies found burnt to a crisp, unidentifiable beyond their genders. Some not even that. The knowledge of it made the imperial court gasp in horror. Not sure, Naruto mumbled in irritation. People are dead. My people are dead. People who you confirmed missing for weeks, months. These people had been within our borders. Operating in our own home for months. We have no excuses, Your Majesty, the Shadow Pan failed in our sacred duty of defending Huaxia. Please punish us, Taranju begged. Naruto frowned. Seeing the proud figure of the Shadow Pan head like this hurt. He still remembered training under him and the 4 August Celestials. It hurt to see a friend like this. Kushina wanted to step forwards and say something. But a giant hand belonging to Yi Fan held her back. The bull man shook his head. Have you confirmed the identities of the culprits? Naruto asked with a regretful sigh. With the camp we found, we believe it is one of the many cults which litter the Shadowlands. Specifically, we believe it is the cult of the Hero of Dawn, Taranju said. The one they call Azor Ahai, the man who butchered his wife for power, one of the ministers, who was an avid historian, gasped. Naruto grimaced as well. Having spent 20 years in Huaxia, of course he knew of their many myths of legends. Chief among them was the Hero of Dawn, or as the people of Huaxia called him, the Red Archfiend. While the western world past the Bone Mountains regale him as a hero, Huaxia saw him in disgust. A deviser who married their most venerated heroine before slaying her in a dark ritual to empower himself. The death of a true person grand sage hurt Huaxia more than the loss of 1,000 armies. If this action didn't ravage his reputation, then his fleeing, abandoning Huaxia to deal with the mother of all chaos invasions, certainly would. Lie for power, steal for power, cheat for power, kill for power. His story was one every Huaxia native knew of. The man who freed the dark gods and then betrayed even them. You are certain? Naruto asked. Yes, have a look at these symbols. Turanju raised the formation to look at the land around him. Naruto's ministers gasped and Yifan looked furious. Kushina meanwhile was only confused. Old Sanjia script, one of Naruto's advisors spat. To see the wordsmith's work used in this manner. Despicable. The Gaotai Emperor, however, looked at the charred human remains. The abandoned crucifixes, tents, cages, and ashes. Out, he said. His voice was quiet, yet beneath lay the foundations of something comparable to a volcanic eruption. Your Majesty, we must. I said out. The communication formation was cut off. The floor tiles cracked, the pillars shook. The entire building trembled for a few seconds. Ministers and imperial staff members bowed and abruptly left the hall. Yifan had to all but drag a shocked Kushina out as well. He shook his head towards her and said, he needs to be alone for a bit. Despite her protests, the bull man led her outside. The red-haired woman only made it to the front entrance before she had enough. She punched the bull man's arm off her. What the hell was that? She demanded. Yifan sighed. The emperor loves his people above all else. His rage this time has been pushed too far. He nearly brought the building down on all of us. He wouldn't have, his chi control is top-notch even among true person sages. That's just an intimidation tactic to get us out, Yifan whispered back. I'm going back there, he's clearly hurting. Kushina made to walk back but Yifan stood in the way. He is not a child to be coddled. There are more reasons he'd want privacy, Yifan lectured. You can't expect me to leave my son alone in a time like this, Kushina argued. He's a grown man more than half a decade older than you. This wouldn't be the first time he's done this. Yifan stood adamantly in her way. You can't sense chi, so I'll tell you what's up. He's having a private conversation right now. Within the confines of the silent throne room. Naruto tapped the dragon-shaped medallion in his palm. He then threw it onto the floor below him while resting on his right knuckle. Hello, husband. A cool woman's voice answered on the other end. Xian-in, Naruto greeted. I suspect this isn't a social call, the woman on the other end stated. So what is it? Chu Province, Nanchen, was Naruto's simple words. Ah. You speak of the sorcerers who snuck in, his wife said. Her tone was a lot more light than Naruto's grave one. It was as if she was talking about the weather. You knew their activities? Of course, I wouldn't be much of a spymaster if I didn't, she chuckled. Why? Why what? Oh. Well, they proved to be beneficial in the long run, she said after a realization. After not hearing Naruto answer for a while she added, you're smart enough to figure out why. Explain it to me, I want to hear it from you. Naruto said calmly. From start to finish, he hadn't raised his voice, he'd been resting his head on his right knuckle the whole time. Yet now his voice lost control over his furious tone. While the presence of foreign sorcerers within Huaxia's lands is insulting, they proved the benefit of drawing in desperate rogue elements to their cause. Among them is our wayward city lord. They were smart enough to not make overt actions. Since our mages are protected, registered and trained in special academies, the chances of them kidnapping them were low to begin with. I've already had my men make sure they caught no new talents in the south. What's more, the more help they provide, the stronger Lord Yi grows. And as Lord Ye's power grows, others will rally to him. Soon enough we'd be able to get them all at once. In other words, you were lazy, Naruto said. It's more convenient this way, drops their guard and gathers them in one place. I also wanted to see how their ritual works, she admitted. Shadowland sorcery is so rare in these parts. Who knows, maybe this god of theirs will prove useful to fighting chaos. Naruto sighed helplessly. Sometimes he forgot how inhuman this woman can be. No, rather she wasn't really human at all. Even among her species, she was a radical oddball. Why didn't you inform me? He said, sounding almost hurt. Would you have gone along with it? She asked challengingly. She'd already known the answer to that. He too knew the answer to that. Mingren, I do everything necessary to protect your kingdom. Abhor these acts if you must, but they are ultimately beneficial. If you wish to keep your peace, sacrifices are necessary, she said. Innocents, not soldiers. Men, women, and children going about their daily lives, Naruto sighed angrily. Drop in an ocean. You do not have it in you to do these deeds, so I will do them for you. I suspect won't be able to stop you from confronting them. She inquired in an even tone. At this moment, Naruto hated how natural she sounded. Our son is there, he said, getting up from his throne. An unexpected development that has sadly pushed my eliminations of them ahead of schedule, Xian admitted. I am currently en route as well. Naruto walked past the medallion where her voice emanated from. The shadow from his light. I love you, my husband, she said sincerely. The medallion deactivated and flew into Naruto's sleeve. Naruto walked with a serious grave expression. His lips were flat as he pushed open the massive doors. Son, what has Kushina tried to ask, but before she could Naruto walked by her. He reached the bottom of the stairs and onto the courtyard. Yi Fan, tell Taranju to head for Nanchen. I'm nipping the problem in the bud. Without waiting for an answer, a colossal amount of chi flooded the celestial palace. It was as if a mountain had suppressed them all using its own colossal weight. It was a crushing sensation. A testament to the emperor's personal power. A reminder that while he dabbled in court intrigue, politics, and was primarily a statesman, he was originally and still is, a warrior. The ground cracked beneath the sole of his feet. Bits of stone pieces floated or kicked up in the air. Seeing this, people braced themselves. Before working in the celestial palace, they've already been warned of this possibility. Ministers and servants alike grabbed hold of stable structures as best they can. Then Naruto took off. In a sonic boom that rocked the entire floating palace, Naruto blew into the sky. Multiple successive booms followed after him as he moved into the distance. Meanwhile, the celestial palace was thrown off balance. The titanic structure above Wei Jin tilted at a 120 degrees angle. Trees and buildings shook. The people of Wei Jin watched nervously as the celestial palace remained in that position. Kushina gaped in shock at the power her son just displayed. This level of strength just from taking off was insane. From the looks of it, he's probably at least on Tsunade's level with the 100 seals active. Probably even stronger. It took several more minutes before the celestial palace righted itself. But in that time, Naruto was already long gone. He didn't end up leaving. He'd been kinda wrong at the time, which he'd been grateful for. While a great many disliked him now, others were thankful and even cheered him on. Apparently, the Duke of Chi State wasn't popular. Even this backwater village hated him. So, he was able to stay in his new home. But deep down, he knew things weren't over. His scholar friend, Juzi, her father, the villagers, they all knew. A week later, more men came. This time, they brought a specialist, an officer of the army of some renown. He was tall, broad-shouldered, skilled and strong. He beat the officer senseless too. With what he's been to, the officer had been nothing special. He'd compare him to the average Chunin. Stronger than Irika-sensei had been, but that was mostly due to the teacher being inexperienced and rusty away from active missions. He'd give Irika 50-50 against the officer. It still astounded him how well these locals fought though. They did not know of chakra, nor did they utilize chakra in the way he had. Their strikes were strong, their taijutsu skills were top-notch. In the subsequent weeks, more people came to harass Shangxi village. He beat every single one of them with a combination of his shadow clones and Rasengan. They weren't easy fights, but he was getting better as well. With his victories, the villagers of Shangxi felt invigorated. Talks of rebellion were brewing with him as the figurehead. He shot that possibility down immediately. He'd seen what Danzo had done, he wanted no part of it. As time went on, more villagers migrated into Shangxi, bolstering the settlement. They were from other villagers who'd heard about the strongman, him, living in Shangxi and wanted his protection from recruitment officers. Duke Xiao Jun of Qi was a warlord among warlords. He forcefully recruited armies from peasantry to use as fodder in his wars against the states of Yan, Qin and Wei. He'd even went on skirmishes with Chu from far south on offshore islands. When he'd heard of him and the reality of these villagers who'd simply had enough, of course he'd taken them in. No matter what, no matter where, he wanted to keep old man Hokage's will alive, the will of fire. Within 3 months, a new village had sprung up. One much larger than Shangxi, built stronger with the united goal of working together to stay away from Zhao Jun's wars. How naive he was back then. This is the rebellious village, sir. Very well, let's see what these traitors are made of. Be careful, sir, they beat Lieutenant San, Fu, and Captain Teng. Multiple squads were beaten. He perked up. He'd been helping out with building a new house when his ears picked up sound from outside. Being here so long, he'd improved as well, enhanced hearing was one of them. Horses, dozens, no hundreds. An army had arrived to pacify the rebellious village. Heh, I knew this will come. I warned you, the fox said. If you aren't going to help, then shut up, he snapped. He doesn't want to focus on the fox, he had to protect his people. The fox sighed and retracted back into the cage. So stubborn, just like Asuno, exactly like him. When will you learn? Even if this world we now live in is not the one we know, humans are all the same. He stepped out, onto the grassy plains outside Shangxi's newly constructed walls. Him alone, for he was the sole protector of these people. They didn't need an army, for they had him. You the one they call Xuanhua Mingren? I am. You are charged with treason and conspiring to overthrow His Highness Duke Qi, Zhao Jun the Thunderous. You will come open the gates and all will follow us to the capital for your punishment. These people are innocent, I am the one who beat your men up, he argued, hoping to not drag others into it. Deep within him the fox laughed and snorted in the same breath. Shangxi is the site of rebellion, by law, all rebellious elements must be purged. That's just wrong. That's the law. You can't take him, the villagers shouted, barging out. He's done more good for us than your lot ever did. My son wanted to be an explorer, wanted to sail the world. But you dragged him to war and didn't even have the balls to deliver his remains back. Yeah, how dare you take young hero away? He was touched. These people were standing up for him. It was an amazing feeling. Tears welled up in his eyes. Revolting? Kill them. He crossed his fingers immediately, shadow clone jutsu. The fox within him observed all the going-ons emotionlessly. The next time, an army of thousands arrived at his doorstep. Zhao Jun led them this time. The hulking giant of a man with his halberd rode a horse unlike any he'd seen. A Kirin from Legends, a horse with all the features of a dragon. You the one they call the Orange Hero? Xuanhua Mingren? He demanded. I am, he declared, standing before the ruler of Qi. He was expecting the man to attack immediately. But instead, he merely guffawed. Nice, you've got strong arms, boy. Let's see how you deal with this. Zhao Jun released his arms back and punched. The mysterious energy of these lands, Qi enhanced his blow to such an extent that just that one strike would have red misted him. But his prisoner wouldn't allow that. The fox's reaction was always faster than his. His sense of danger far greater. Though he had grown stronger in the past months, the fox was far superior and as such noticed how dangerous Zhao Jun was. A red cloak of chakra encased him, strengthening him. The bubble-like cloak allowed him to tank the blow head-on. Zhao Jun's eyes widened in shock. Not bad, heh, you're like a wild animal when you stand like that, he smirked. Almost like a fox. He stood on all fours. High cloak flaring around in with four tails swishing behind him. Right, that's enough, Zhao Jun said. You passed my test, boy. Now then, I want you to join my army. He stood there, confusion marring his face. No. He declared. He argued against the violence Zhao Jun brought. He'd seen the people who suffered, those who lost their loved ones. You've only heard one side. Come with me and I'll show you how great the threats we really face, he said, outstretching his hand. He hesitated. Without him, the people would be in danger. But Zhao Jun should be heard as well. He agreed under the condition that the village remains safe. He came back with a final denial. Zhao Jun toured him around Qi for 3 months. He showed him all the border sites and old of unspeakable horror from the foreign countries. The ambitious Duke of Qin, the frivolous Duke of Yan, the arrogant Duke of Wei, and the self-titled Azure Emperor from Chu. But his training as a ninja paid off. For once, the fox's warnings had also helped. In the dead of night, he snuck out and questioned others. Civilians and soldiers under the guise of one of their own. The espionage training the academy taught him, though half remembered, served him well. He denied Zhao Jun's request. The man was a warlord. Conquering territory of after territory. He was a man who was very much unlike his father, a weak man pushed around by his neighbors and servants. A man he didn't want to fight for. He said as much to him when he declined once more. He left the furious duke behind. A duke who felt insulted by his words. A naive decision that he'd come to regret. Oh, how naive he was back then. But he trusted the duke to keep to his honor. An honor he'd heard his soldiers relay. He came back to a village in flames. Oi Lu Han, are our baggages packed yet? Natsuo asked, rubbing the sleep out of his eye. Lord Ye's hospitality was really good, days of joyous feasting and partying as repayment for defeating a threat like the Taotai. How could the prince say no to so much fun? The city lord had really proven himself. He maybe held controversial views regarding the law, but he was an inviting man. Natsuo understood that much of the nobility still held a superiority complex compared to the peasantry. He deeply hated it, but it was ingrained since he was a child. But oftentimes, as his father had taught him, to ensure peace, compromises had to be made. No, my prince, the warrior grumbled. We're just working on new transport for the things you bought. We won't be ready to depart for another day. Natsuo winced with the annoyance in Lu Han's voice. Okay, so he was a spoiled brat who threw around money. But those sculptures the artisans made were so good though. Carve my martial arts masters from a stone magically raised by Lord Yi. Nanchen had always been famed for exotic artistic goods produced by sorcerers and sculpted by martial artists. Since Lord Yi was a sorcerer of renown himself and a man interested in the finer aspects of life, this was a natural outcome. When the prince saw the artisans already at work depicting his battle with the Taotai, he naturally became interested. While he had initially wanted to leave after a few days, he ended up staying for more than a week. Lord Yi was also more than willing to host him. His generosity allowed the prince to move out of the merchant's small by comparison manor and into Lord Ye's palace. But even all good things must end. Lu Han had been getting a bit impatient waiting for the prince, and as such Natsuo decided to leave in the early morning the next day. Currently, his retinue were busy packing his things, which required additional wagons to be purchased. Natsuo nervously looked away from the visibly irritated warrior god. Well, sorry, he whined. But you have to admit, these people have an artistic flair. I know, most of the architects that built Weijin came from the south, Lu Han grumbled. But we've also been stalled by you longer than we had to. I should have taken the assignment to Kuresh, a celestial dragon guard moving boxes in the background complained. The prince could only look downcast at the nagging. Looking around at his own accommodations, he felt a bit guilty making elite soldiers do boring chores. So, have you picked out our next destination? Lu Han asked. Well, we've already passed Chu's capital on the way here. So I'm thinking of heading back up north towards Qin, cross the Yangtze River and towards Xianyang. Haven't been there for a while after all, the prince said. I'm sure Ingzhen will be more than happy to accommodate you, Lu Han said. Judging by our speed, if the weather is good then we can make it in a few weeks. Weeks? Why didn't we travel by dragon horse chariots again? Natsuo pouted. Because someone wanted to see the beauty of the countryside, Lu Han reminded. Now stop complaining and either help out or read a book or something. Nah, I've already seen all of Nanchen, he said before sitting down and watching the servants and men work. Yeah, I think I can read a book. He picked up a book and began passing the time. Time passed slowly as Natsuo read through his back catalog of reading material. For him, this vacation around Huaxia gave him plenty of time to familiarize himself with other parts of the country that he didn't often visit. Books of history, legends, and culture were among them. The state of Chu he was reading about and currently visiting was one of the oldest states that has remained since ancient times. After the first invasion of chaos was repelled, the land of Huaxia was broken. The final visages of the once mighty empire crumbled and many gods fell. The crow god of the sun, the spiritual elephant god, the nine-headed lion, the Kunpeng, the bone god, so many of Huaxia's deities perished. Civilization was essentially reset. From there, mortal men had to pick up the pieces after that. The disappearance of the gods forced mankind to protect themselves from the many monsters from the world. The establishment of Wulin held out against such monsters. For 4,000 years, martial artists protected the Huaxia. At least that was so until the war against chaos 4,000 years ago. The Chu state was a remnant from that era. Its ruler was a dependent of one of the greatest generals from the Golden Empire of Dawn that existed prior to Wulin. Natsuo turned the paper pages with interest. There were many names and events recorded in the thick tome he read. Many of them were likely bloated out of proportion and exaggerated as propaganda, but they did make for an interesting read. The sun grazed the prince overhead. He looked up at the fireball and yawned. Man, it's only just past noon. His eyes trailed down. He narrowed his eyes and recognized a name. Yi Longyi. He muttered. It was the same Yi as Lord Ye's name. Even the land granted to this Longyi was the same as Nanchen. Out of curiosity, the prince called out to Lu Han. Hey Lu Han, ever heard of Yi Longyi? Huaxia's strongest martial warrior stopped what he was doing and turned back. Yi Longyi. Which one? He asked walking over. Natsuo pointed at a name in his book, one that was a part of a block of text that described early Chu history. Azure Flame Sect, Elder Yi, Lu Han read. This is the time of Wulin's downfall. My prince, you're interested in Wulin. Just found a similar name is all. Is this person related to the city lord? He asked. Should be, it would make sense considering Lord Ye's abilities. Is he that famous? Natsuo inquired. Not particularly no, Lu Han shook his head. He's a sorcerer of great skill in Chu but he was often overshadowed by heroes of his era like Hong Wuying, Ingzhen, Gu Lingxin, and your father. He didn't even play that big of a role in the Demon Wars a year ago. He was there. How come I didn't hear about it? Like I said, he wasn't particularly important in the battle. I think he fought against some of the Changer of Wei's demons in the siege of the Turtle Gate but that's about it. Much of Chu's personnel were slaughtered and they exited the war soon after that, Lu Han sighed. Wasn't a pretty time. Yeah, I remember. Demons penetrated Huaxia and attacked Wei Jin, Natsuo shivered at the memory. Although the invasion had been over for a year, scars still ran deep. The sight of his father hunched over, bloody wound through his stomach, still haunted him. His invincible father, who in less than a decade united Huaxia, suffered more wounds in that one battle than his entire life. Uncle Kurama's titanic figure lying in the open plains. Uncle Yifan's figure cratering the mountains north. His own mother lying motionless in a pool of blood. Hundreds of thousands of demons, red, blue, green, and purple. Monstrosities that should have never been born poured into Huaxia like a flood. Their dark god's presence spreading across the very lands itself. That demonic face that appeared. That twisted demonic face facing him down. The horrifying tongues, pincers, teeth, and eyes. Twisted sadistic eyes. "Ints, my prince, Lu Han's voice snapped the dragon out of it. Natsuo calmed his breathing yet still shivered from the memory. "Are you alright, my prince?" Lu Han asked. "Do you need water, or?" "I'm fine, Lu Han," Natsuo said. "I'm already over it." Lu Han sighed dejectedly. "If you say so, my prince." That evening, in the northern gates of Nanshen, a caravan arrived discreetly. A thin misty veil cloaked them in an illusion that distorts the vision of any who viewed them. Lord Yi stood at the front of the gate waiting. He didn't look particularly happy and instead appeared annoyed. Seeing this, the head cultist of the sorcerer cult headed forward towards him. "Finally, do you know how expensive it was keeping the prince here?" Lord Yi projected his frustrations at the crew who arrived. In the darkness of night, the sorcerer cult from the Shadowlands arrived with their cargo in tow. Various artifacts and personnel dismounted from their steeds, monstrous creatures known as Taowu. "If you have time to whine, you have time to help. These artifacts are fragile and need to be moved with utmost care," the head cultist spat. "Humph," Lord Yi snorted. He waved his fingers, signaling his men to help the cultists out. "Is everything you need done?" Lord Yi asked the head cultist. "The prince is primed to leave early tomorrow." "Everything is done, we just need to get to the Cloud Serpent." "How many men do you have at your disposal?" Lord Yi didn't even hesitate to answer, 700, most of them are veterans from the demon invasion. "Came here for support when I offered. They are aligned with my views." "You." "There are 30 sorcerers among us, but we can muster a few thousand from the faithful in the city," he said. "Fucking fanatics," the voice of one of Lord Ye's men grumbled as the head cultist said so. Many of Lord Ye's men also nodded their heads and opening frowned. The head cultist mere scoffed at their words. "Ignorant children who knows not the ways of the one true God," the cultist sighed in disappointment. "Roller shall guide you from the darkness that clouds your mind." "My lord, why must we work with these fanatics? Their god is the arch-betrayer," one of Lord Ye's men said before a chain of shadow gripped tightly onto his neck. "Control your men lest I tear out their tongues for speaking such sacrilege," the cultist threatened. "He will not be an issue. He knows the importance of our partnership," Lord Yi said looking at the man. "Jean, return to the barracks and cool your head." The alliance was rocky but a necessary one. The Emperor was an ill omen for Chu. If Lord Yi had to consort with Shadowland sorcerers then so be it. Lord Yi shifted uncomfortably as more and more magical artifacts were unloaded. They were all placed under cleats that dampened their magical properties, but standing this close, someone as attuned to magic as he could feel it. But he held firm, he was certain he made the right choice. Never again will Chu need to suffer for the Emperor's decisions. Never again will sons and daughters of Chu walk to their deaths to stem the tide of chaos. Let the monstrosities of the far north be the North's problem, he wanted none of that for his people. He was certain Duke Zhang thought the same. The former Azure Emperor Meivi kept silent all these years, but he knew better. He still remembered when Xuanwu Mingren marched into Chu more than half a decade ago. The mighty Qin had fallen and they were next. He'd ridden into the battlefield bravely on his warhorse, his hard-earned magic ready. As a young hero, he fought at his emperor's side against the foreigner. He fought and he fought, even coming into direct blows with the foreign emperor. But in the end, he could only wallow in his own defeat. What came next was worst. Laws after laws that disrupted the stable order of life. The destruction of ancient clans and lineages on a whim. The constant eyes of the demons and monstrosities the Empress employs. Worst of all was the forced conscriptions that went north to defend lands that weren't their own. Little child, we shared destiny. The extended claw that held his throat still caused phantom pains on the sorcerer lord's neck. He'd wish none of that hell on the sons and daughters of Chu on anyone ever again. That crooked beak and bright blue feathers. Those glowing eyes filled with untold horrors of another dimension. My lord, the Shadowland cult is nearly done, one of Lord Ye's men said approaching the city lord. Good, go to your positions and wait for our command, get your crossbows ready, he commanded. By your will. For Chu, the man said cupping his hands and bowing. For Chu, he answered back. His man scurried away, rejoining his fellow soldiers and various other recruits. The way they were headed were to high places that surrounded the departing route the prince will take. Their crossbows were already enchanted with iron and fire magic to be lethal. Lord Yi nodded his head at his men's bravery. Chances were, all of them will not see past the battle. The prince's retinue had included near 100 celestial dragon guards, overkill for any army in Huaxia. If not for the extensive amounts of magic the cult had brought with them along with veterans he'd recruited long ago, these 100 men could probably take the entire city in minutes. Of course, the bigger problem was the man constantly beside the prince. Lu Han was not a simple figure. Though he may be a peasant, he was one of exceptional martial skill. There was a saying in Huaxia, magic before martial arts. Magic was a superior discipline only accepted those with aptitude. There always produced elites. But martial arts was something anyone can participate in, their warriors were far weaker on average. Mages were always superior to martial artists. They freely manipulated the power of nature to their own whims. They were both more difficult to find and train, as well as superior fighters on the battlefield. But that isn't always the case, martial artists cannot be underestimated. The era of Wulin proved this fact perfectly. Though easier to train and thus numerous, they were also harder to master. A true master of martial arts would exceed most sorcerers, himself included. Someone like Lu Han, a god among martial artists, was even more dangerous. Lord Yi walked towards his own family compounds. The empty stone pavement met his footsteps. He had no real family after his father's death during the foreign emperor's wars. He twisted his head and saw the cult leader following behind him. What do you want? He asked rather harshly. He didn't particularly like his partner and hence never bothered to show much respect. You were breaking away from your men. Just wanted to make sure you don't pull a runner, the religious leader said. You can be assured, I want to succeed just as much as you, he said. You'd make for an excellent priest of roller, the cultist said. You have all the drive and conviction to serve the true God's will. What say you? I declined once and I decline again, Lord Yi spat. I want no part in your little cult. This alliance only lasts until the foreign emperor's regime is overthrown. The cultist leaned back and muttered something in another rabble language Lord Yi hadn't bothered learning. Of course, he said. A shame, you are all ignorant to the Lord's light. The shadows still yet cloud your judgment. The four idols you worship are merely spirits mistaken as gods. Are you simply to lecture me on theology? Lord Yi spat. No, the cultist shook his head. But it does make me curious. Your emperor supposedly carries the approval of those four and the mandate to rule. His family also counts cloud serpents among them. Not all dragons are good, the Great Flood told us such, Lord Yi snorted. The august ones are special but they hardly represent the monstrous demons of the lands. The foreign emperor's fabrication is just that, a fabrication. I can run down to the embroider and have one made for myself. I'll admit to not being familiar with that legend, the cult leader said. But anyway, are you confident in your preparations? I hardly want to lose my own for your folly. NIU. Are you confident in holding back Lu Han and the Celestial Dragon Guards? Lord Yi asked. We have elementals prepared for that, the cult leader said. He flicked his robes up to show a sheathed sword on his hip. It had a fierce hilt guard with curved blades carved in. My God's will is with me. That man will not be an easy opponent. Greater demons have fallen to his spear, Lord Yi said. He looked towards the horizon. The sun crow was just beginning to show his flying form. Dawn comes, let's take our positions. A few hours, that's all he had left. A few hours and everything will change. A woman whistled strolling on roving clouds. Occasionally, she'd caress her flat belly as she walked. Her long flowing silver hair was tied up in a neat tail. Accompanying her was an elderly man with a hunched back. He appeared incredibly old and tired. His wrinkles were ugly and his dark skin was evidently sagging. In the woman's free hand was a circular talisman that had long lost its light. In the early hours of the morning, when the sun had not risen yet, she turned her head to look left. Mortal eyes cannot view this distance, but her ethereal ones caught a figure moving in incredible speed across the country. An orange blitz that resembled a comet shooting across the still dark sky. The old man beside her followed her actions. He recovered quick. Not many can shrug off a god's blow like that. Your Majesty, should we hurry along as well? His Highness live is at stake and His Majesty is already past us, he inquired the woman. With this kind of firepower? Hardly, the woman said without a change in tone. Answer me this, Gao Lingbao. Who on this side of earth can challenge the combined might of my husband and the god of war? Her confidence was unshakable. The old man nodded in understanding. This servant was dull, please forgive me. The woman, Empress Yen Yin of Huaxia, however, took no notice of him. Her gaze cast themselves onto the southern city of Nanshan thousands of kilometers away. Birth of a god, or is it the return of a hero? Either way, the magic involved is a generation in a lifetime. I'm so excited, she smiled. Someone, anyone. He cried, digging his bloody fingernails into the burning ruins. He was desperate, someone had to be alive. The fire was still ongoing, so it couldn't have been long since it was lit. Chakra-enhanced hands burrowed their way into burning wood. He pulled and pushed and threw aside large beams that were formerly houses. He recognized the tailor, Mr. Lau's house, though it was in ruins. He recognized the water reservoir they were building to collect the rain. He recognized the fisherman family that had taken him in. Juzi, where are you? He cried out. He raced for the smoldering pile. He desperately ran forward only to trip on something crusty. His gaze trailed downwards, catching the sight of a blackened hand. Drip drip drip. The water of his mindscape mirrored the tears he shed in the real world. What did I tell ya? He glanced back, facing the crimson cage and the sitting nine tails within. He had no words for the fox. In the real world, he went back to digging. Corpses, there were just so many corpses. Charred remains of people he knew, burnt to a state where he didn't even recognize them anymore. Squatting here, at the base of Juzi and her father's house. The nailed burnt corpse of a man and a girl lay. He was silent as the situation washed over him. Their prone forms just lying there. The fisherman's face contorted in anguish. Juzi's legs spread apart over the dining room table. The scholar who was bisected just outside the house. Why? 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 They didn't want to get involved. They just wanted peace. For fuck's sakes, they had found peace. You can only blame yourself, a cold voice said above him. He raised his tired neck to look at the man who spoke. He vaguely recognized him as one of the people following Zhao Jun when they first met. He rode a flying horse whose wings flapped above the burning smoke. His hand was raised and a circular blazing fireball appeared in his hands. It expanded until it became the size of a miniature sun. It was probably as large as an entire house. You should have followed His Highness's will, the man sneered. He released the blast, engulfing the entire town and him with it in an explosion of fire. The mushroom cloud would be seen for miles. Upon the ashes of the village, several days later, scavengers arrived. These men were always around, hoping to pick up any valuables from battlefields or destroyed sites. The peaceful village was just next on the chopping block. "Hey big bro, check this out," one of the men scavenging called out. "There's something shiny beneath this rubble." He pointed at a pile of soot and wood. A whole heap of destroyed ruins that filled out the rest of the village in a horrifying reminder of the Duke of Chi's power. Beneath his pile, something was indeed shiny. A crystal to be exact. A crystal that was part of a necklace that he wore since arriving. A gift from Granny. These men reached out for this necklace that sat upon a plank of blackened wood. Most of the string was burnt off but the crystal remained. "Some kind of jewelry," the eldest brother said. "Might be valuable. Brothers, help me move the rubble so I can grab it." The men worked together to heave chances of wood and ash off. Some surviving furniture and tools were present as well. Among the fuss, they uncovered a foot near the crystal. "Surprisingly good condition," one of the men said. "Leave it, whoever's already dead anyway," the eldest brother said. He brushed past the foot and took hold of the crystal. In the gap just above the crystal, a red eye opened. "What?" the eldest barely uttered before an animalistic human hand grabbed hold of his wrist. "That hat's no to yours," his coarse and weak voice said as he pulled himself out of the rubble. He was burnt and bloody. Kept alive only by the demon fox's chakra. "Get away you freak," the eldest yelled, slapping away his hand. He pulled out his sword from his belt. "Fuck, he actually survived General Chang's great firebolt." "Who?" he grunted weakly. "Heh, survived or not, it won't be long. I say we bring his head to Duke Xiao. Might get some reward money as well," the eldest said after recomposing himself. "Xiao. Xiao Jun." He was kicked onto his back. "Yeah, Duke Xiao Jun. The same big shot your dumbass pissed off," the eldest brother sneered. "Some hero you are. Who the fuck goes against the Duke of Qi?" Xiao Jun, now he remembered. Xiao Jun who lured him away. Xiao Jun who attacked him unprovoked. Xiao Jun who destroyed his new home. Xiao Jun who killed his friends. Xiao Jun. "So it begins," Kurama the Nine-Tails mused. His vantage point captured the bloodshed before his eyes perfectly. He smirked knowing he'd be free soon. The seal had already loosened significantly. The brat has only expedited the process. The version 2 chakra cloak that clung on to him is already on 3 tails. The early morning saw a horde of carriages manned by soldiers rolling towards the gates of Nanchen. The paved streets had long been cleared, allowing for many horse-drawn carriages through. Natsuo sat in his own private carriage, still rubbing the sleep out of his eye. Lu Han sat opposing him, staring out the window. The sun had risen not too long ago and it was still fairly cold. The chilly air had no real impact on their duties though, they were used to working in odd hours. The silent ride was smooth. Nanchen was certainly well maintained, a lot better than many northern cities. Then again, the south always had the best economics and was safe from a lot of the greater threats Huaxia faced. But it was strangely quiet. Natsuo had expected there to be at least some people going about the early mornings. Some works required an easy start after all. But Nanchen was almost like a ghost town. A strange feeling emerged from within his chest. The early morning sun calming hovered just above the horizon. Lu Han frowned slightly within the carriage as they neared the exit. "What gall," he muttered. What's wrong?" Natsuo asked curiously. Lu Han pressed a finger on his lips. Natsuo was instantly silent. The sleep disappeared from his eyes and he went rigid. Lu Han's eyes scanned his surroundings. Lu Han closed his eyes and activated his chi sense. A martial artist of sufficiently high level like him could easily sense the natural energy around him. Lu Han was the greatest martial warrior in Huaxia. His martial ability was basically magic. Natsuo was also alert. If Lu Han is suddenly so serious, then there was certainly a very good reason for it. The wheelhouse abruptly stopped. Lu Han gazed out the side windows and sighed. Knew something was up with that guy, he muttered in annoyance. Was that why you wanted to leave so badly? Natsuo asked. Taranju's already confirmed things are fishy. I just didn't think anyone will be stupid enough to try anything with you. Especially not with me here, Lu Han sighed in disappointment. He rose from his seat and headed for the door. Wait, let me join you, Natsuo said with a displeased frown. I want to see just why someone will suddenly turn traitor. Lu Han took a look at his young charge and opened the wheelhouse doors. Stay behind me, he said before stepping out into the main road. He walked to the front of the caravan. They were close to the gates, just that they were being blocked. Scores of men in armor and spears stood in their way. Lu Han wore a deep frown as he noticed the leading two individuals. The man on the right was someone he had become somewhat familiar with. Their host for their stay in Nanchen. Though City Lord Yi had started on rocky grounds with Natsuo, he had nevertheless somewhat endeared himself to the royal party. But that was all a lie. The other person wasn't someone Lu Han recognized. He did not resemble any native of Huaxia. Lu Han did not know enough about the Western world to place him, but his robes and magical jewelry indicated his sorcerer status. He was probably the sorcerer from the Shadowlands. Yemo, explain yourself, Natsuo said from beside Lu Han. The prince did not look pleased at all. An unhappy frown marred the face of the young prince. Why do you block us? Lord Yi raised his hand. The sound of footsteps came into earshot as dozens upon dozens of men armed with crossbow walked out of the rooftops. Soldiers armed with swords and spears walked out of alleys, cornering the royal party. Natsuo tensed. Though he carried 1,000 men with him, the majority of them were ordinary soldiers. In this scenario, they'd also be dubbed as his servants and cooks as well as soldiers. His only real protection was the celestial dragon guards. These men and women would easily become fodder in the battle to come. You go against His Majesty. You dare commit treason. Lu Han growled. Piss on that foreign pretender, Lord Yi spat. I am saving my people from that butcher in Wei Jin. How dare you call my father that? Natsuo shouted. He saved you and all of Huaxia. You ungrateful piece of shit. The celestial dragon guards slammed their spears on the pavement in anger along with the prince. Lu Han unleashed a swarm of killing intent towards Lord Yi and his allies. They all instantly took a step back and couldn't help but shiver. Yemo, you really are trash. To think they used to call you a hero of Chu, Lu Han snorted. His spear was drawn and pointed directly at the city lord. What would a blind dog like you understand, Lord Yi snorted. Nothing but an uneducated peasant boy who can't see the difference between. You don't have a right to speak to him like that, Natsuo cut the city lord off. I thought you were just a bit old-fashioned. But it turns out you're just another opportunistic traitor. Silence beast, Lord Yi yelled back. Whoosh! A thrown spear launched itself at Lord Yi. The experienced warrior senses of the city lord were the only thing that allowed him to move his head away from the strike. Lu Han's outstretched arm retracted while the man gave Lord Yi a look of utter contempt. My, what an excellent opening act, the sorcerer beside Lord Yi said. Your skills precede you, god of war, he complimented. I don't believe we've ever met, Lu Han said eyeing the sorcerer. We haven't. I am Basoner, high priest of the one true god. Roller the Lord of Light. I am pleased to make your acquaintance, he said. I see your fire burns as bright as any of my colleagues. I extend an invitation for you to join us under the true god. Natsuo couldn't believe his ears. The man sounded utterly delusional. And who even was Roller? Some no-name deity from the Shadowlands? Allying with second-rate cults? Lu Han snorted. I thought the sorcerers were something big like the Shadow Council, or the deathly loremasters, or even the elusive warlocks of Azarath. Lord Yi gritted his teeth while the sorcerer beside him shook his head in disappointment. A shame, you two are blind to the truth. The four beasts of these lands have blinded you to the god who saved you thousands of years ago. Lu Han narrowed his eyes while Natsuo looked enraged. Be careful, the prince warned. That's my grandfather you speak of. The cloud serpent is ignorant of the truth. But he is powerful and shall serve as a good offering, the sorcerer told Lord Yi, who nodded. He signaled towards his men. Kill them all, Natsuo instructed coldly. These people didn't deserve any justice. For the sin of insulting his family and heritage, they don't deserve a trial under his father's laws. Death was the only thing they deserved. Arrows released from crossbows, hailing down upon the caravans. They were all magically enchanted with both speed and fire. At their quick launch, men were struck down before they could respond properly. But before they could do any more damage, high-speed orange clouds knocked away hundreds of arrows at once. Natsuo held the cloud formed in his hand and practically snarled. Today, we shall free our god from the bind these blind heretics placed him in, the sorcerer cult leader shouted. Today we shall resurrect the one true God who shall part the shadow and bring us salvation. For the night is dark and full of terrors. For the light is dark and full of terrors. Enthusiastic chants came from a large subsection of the enemy army who charged out of allies. Natsuo's men went ahead to meet them in bloody combat. Dozens of warriors and several sorcerers ran towards Natsuo. The mages charged up large fireballs and shot them towards the prince while a combination of Lord Yez and the Cut's men armed with weapons ran forwards. Natsuo took a step back allowing Lu Han to walk forwards. The warrior cracked his knuckle and punched forwards unleashing a gust of powerful wind. Magic users were barely able to cast a shield up and were still knocked off their feet. Some less prepared were obliterated into meat paste. The warriors weren't so lucky and were all pulverized by the pressure. Only Lord Yi and the cult leader got out relatively unscathed. While Lu Han's punch uprooted buildings and pavement, Lord Yi slammed his hand not he ground creating a massive wall of steel. His legs slid back as he gritted his teeth resisting the attack. The cult sorcerer was also prepared. His hands flew up and flaming palms shot out holding the impact back. He too was pushed back but he held firm. Both glanced back to see the collapse of the northern gate and the surrounding walls. On the side of the streets, celestial dragon guards cut down dozens of men at once. Only the more capable veteran warriors were able to resist fighting one by teaming up. The only ones having an easier time were the sorcerers from the Shadowlands. Shadow magic rose and carved around the dragon guards who defended and attacked with a flurry of halberd strikes and martial arts. Their use of chi worked in their favor to resist the magic and strike through them at the mages. Make for the fields, Lu Han ordered. Stop them, Lord Yi shouted bringing both hands together to fire a blast of fire in the shape of a crane. Lu Han held his hand out and caught the flaming bird by its neck and slammed it onto the ruined ground destroying the construct. He then kicked an air blast that threw Lord Yi off his feet. The sorcerer grimaced and snapped his fingers. A ring of magical fire lit, engulfing Nan Chen in its entirety. He waved his hands and summoned tendrils of shadow across the battlefield. They slammed into houses doing as much damage as possible to break up the dragon guards. Natsuo took a step forwards. His hands transformed into claws only for Lu Han's hand to stop him. Their target is you, don't leave my side, he said. Lord Yi and the sorcerer ran forwards towards them. Lu Han raised his palm. Air gathered in it, formed by his chi and transformed into an airstream the shape of a spear. He spun his makeshift weapon around forming a hurricane. Veiled shield. Helio shield. Working together, their shared magic formed a shield resembling a disc that was a mix of clear liquid and raging fire. An odd mix that served its purpose in shielding both mages from the martial artist's attack. As a martial artist, Lu Han lacked many of the complex elemental transformations mages can employ. All he could really rely on was the sheer force of his attacks. Even then, he easily blew back of them. Attack, for the true god. The head cultist commanded. Legions of men and women carrying pitchforks and homemade weaponry charged fanatically at Lu Han and Natsuo. The warrior did not hesitate to throw out mighty palm strikes that sent bursts of air that obliterated dozens of people with ease. Natsuo was a bit disturbed by the carnage of raining human body parts. But he held firm. His cloud magic burned with orange flames and he knew many had already died by his hands. He maybe stood behind Lu Han the whole time, but that didn't mean he wasn't fighting. His eyes lit up with faint light as he scanned the battle around him. Celestial Dragon Guards had taken no casualties and were cutting down scores of men at once. Other soldiers had been killed, but it was not bad. His gaze narrowed as he observed the men coming in to reinforce the enemies. There were faint black outlines around many of these people. His mind went into contemplation. Remember, the eyes of a dragon, or heck any superior being, are highly sensitive to supernatural energies. Even the most subtle of uses. Both magic and martial arts uses the same source of energy. Even your father's unique heritage uses a transformations of such. In time, you'd be able to recognize these signs. Are you listening, hatchling? Natsuo widened his eyes. The black lines, they were seeping into their heads, their minds. Such fanaticism on such scale for an unheard of religion was unnatural. Last he checked, the South wasn't that unconnected from the greater empire. Wait, something doesn't feel right, he mused. A few celestial dragon guards cut down some magicians and turned their attention to the head cultist who had retreated several steps. They charged, aiming to finish the leaders of the insurrection. The cult leader dodged the halberd strikes and pushed away another. He backed away and folded his palms together and chanted. In a burst of light, he shot snakes of both shadow and flame. A magical spell that cut through the trained elites. Their skins withered and they collapsed in death. The sorcerer then turned the trained chi on Lu Han. He fired a bolt of pure grayish light at the grand warrior. Lu Han was undeterred, however, his punches easily cracked any magic thrown at him like shattering glass. Lord Yi and the cult leader shared a look and nodded. They bolted towards the warrior with their bodies engulfed in various enchantments. Mystical veils cloaked their bodies and they were like projectiles of iron as they engaged the unarmed man in combat. Lord Yi held dual blades made of iron and fire which fused together under his control. He was incredibly well trained in martial arts despite his intensive magical education. The same could also be said for the cult leader. They stacked with swings and kicks which Lu Han countered with his own. His palm slapped away Lord Ye's knee and his own palm impacted the noble's chest, pushing high back. He then turned his full attention to the cult leader. The sorcerer from the Shadowlands fought like fanatic. He was not unskilled, but there was a ferocity to his strikes that resembled a Cornite demon. His skin turned red and he shattered the pavement with his blows. Only Lu Han was able to batter away his fist. He caught the sorcerer's palm, which also shot out rays of energy. His subsequent punch spilled blood from the man's stomach and he threw the sorcerer into an already ruined building. Lu Han held both his arms below him outstretched in open palms. Great wind and fierce lightning manifested below him like a howling beast. Raging tiger circular destruction. The vortex of chi ripped apart the northern edges of Nanchen like tissue paper. The celestial dragon guards quickly retreated while the common soldiers dived for cover behind their wagons. Natsuo's magical clouds did much to create a stage barrier for his men. Nanchen on the other hand wasn't so lucky. Lu Han ripped the city apart in one move. A controlled spiral of chi that was like a hurricane bellowing from the south of a roaring tiger. Winds of black and white resembling the mythical white tiger instantly killed hundreds of men. Seeing the approaching blast, Lord Yi and the sorcerer chanted incantations. They summoned forth an enormous bolt of blue lightning and an enormous sword of fire with their spells. With rough coordination, they were able to withstand the martial technique. Though it seemed far more crude than the refined control mages had, Lu Han had proven himself to be far more destructive. He aimed his fist back at the two men and punched. His fist was like a charging bull. The force was so great that the hilly landscape overturned itself. Soil and grass ripped away into a well-dug tunnel. Seeing this development, the sorcerer engulfed his body in a thick layer of shadow. He melted into the ground with gritted teeth, leaving Lord Yi to sustain the punch with his body. Damn you! The city lord cried towards his partner as he felt all bones in his body break. His muscles were shredded despite the body-enhancing earth magic and healing water magic he used. The poor man cratered outside of Nanchen. The fire around the city was blown away just like that. As the sorcerer manifested on the ruined city walls, he fell to his knees with a gasp. He eyed the destruction and the martial artist who barely looked winded. Much of his cult personnel was already killed. So this is a Jinren Grand Sage, he murmured. The celestial dragon guards waked forwards and surrounded the prince who was still scanning Nanchen's northern edges. He grimaced at the destruction. Kill. Kill the beast. For the Lord. In the name of the Lord of Light. Black energy seeped out of the sorcerer's robes, they leaked into a massive pool that formed into black doorways from which people poured out, blocking the way to escape. The head cultist felt his reserves of power drained beyond belief. But his magical artifacts on his person served to mitigate the damage. The gifts from his god opened doorways all over Nanchen for clear reinforcement. Hordes of civilians poured out of Nanchen. From other parts of the city, people poured out like a fanatical mob and raced for Natsuo's men. Hundreds more people crowded to streets in a never-ending horde. The prince eyed the sorcerer who was panting. His shadowy hand was touching the stone walls, seeping dark magic from his pores. Mental influence, Natsuo realized, eyeing various charms the Shadowland dweller wore. His guards and Lu Han were already prepared to kill all the civilians of Nanchen to eliminate the annoyances. To them, ordinary people were hardly a threat, especially now that the powerful fighters were all killed. In a despicable act, Lord Yi had allowed the sorcerers to put his city under a mind control. How could normal civilians resist mental influences? The northern parts where they were leaving from was relatively empty, but that was because Lord Yi had used it as a staging ground for his attack. Now though, people from all over were rushing over, carried by tendrils of darkness. Stop, they're under a brainwashing spell, Natsuo ordered. My prince, the celestial dragon guards argued. They are a threat that must be eliminated for your safety. These elites were prepared to blow away all these people. Natsuo was the priority. Natsuo transformed into his true form then and there. The orange-scaled dragon flew into the sky and roared, deafening the people. We can't wantonly kill my father's civilians, the dragon prince said. He hovered in the air and unleashed a breath of fire towards the sorcerer. However, his flames drained away into the sword sheathed at the sorcerer's side. His hand reached for the handle. Natsuo, get down here, Lu Han said, leaping into the air. He crossed his arms before the dragon tanking a crimson slash. The sorcerer held the unsheathed blade with both hands and panted. My God, he panted. Thank you for your aid. He swung wildly, indiscriminately at the celestial dragon guards, jade warriors, and Lu Han. Lu Han's face wore a serious expression. His legs pushed hard at the air and he charged for the sorcerer at blinding speed. He was stopped when a pillar of fire engulfed the area, scalding even his enhanced skin. Lu Han landed on the pavement while Natsuo floated down beside him. What is that? The magic coming from him is insane, the prince uttered in shock. Witness the power of true God, the sorcerer howled. His sword, strangely normal in appearance, glowed in treasure lights that engulfed the distant citizens of Nanchen. They cascaded into the blade and spat out in a tsunami of fire. Dozens of celestial dragon guards ran forwards. Their arms outstretched as they pushed up, manipulated the natural chi to rip out the ground beneath them into a massive wall that shielded the prince from the fire. Lu Han, this fire isn't natural, Natsuo said. His lizard-like eyes narrowed from the heat the fire gave off. There was a distinct quality to it that he really don't like. The warrior nodded. Return to your human form, you're too big of a target, he instructed the dragon. Burn for me. An ancient fierce voice roared from within the flames. A burning figure resembling a giant with molten skin stepped out. Its face snarled. Its hair was wild tendrils of black smog and its teeth were sharp and rotten. It roared a challenging cry and stomped onto the ground, causing an earthquake in its wake. It strolled out of the flames towards the celestial dragon guards towering over them. It stood over 20 meters tall and roared, drinking in treasure lights from all over Nanchen. "That's a god," one of the celestial dragon guards near Natsuo whispered. "He can't be faulted for thinking such." This creature emanated power that those not even sensitive to chi could detect from a mile away. Natsuo glared at the creature emerging from the flames. He turned his neck and observed the city engulfed in flames. Everyone that didn't have some form of protection had been burned. What emerged was a massive demon of fire. Overall, very few survivors remained and most of them were his people. "That's not a god," Natsuo corrected. "Divinity carries a very specific scent no matter the type. That's a very strong herald of a god though. Not unlike greater demons," he said, shivering at the mention of demons. "For Roller." The massive molten giant dragged its massive palm across the pavement. It pulled and ripped out a massive sword easily a third of its height and lifted it above its head. "Behold, a herald of the one true god," the sorcerer said triumphantly. "Kill all the interlopers, the cloud serpent is mine," he told the herald of Roller. "Die." The herald leapt high into the air and stomped the ground with such force that it uprooted the entirety of the northern city. Chunks of stone and wood flew into the air in the wake of its landing. Celestial dragon guards and common men alike were tossed beneath a mountain of rubble and fire as the herald attacked. Natsuo climbed into the air and swiped the side of the giant with his claws. He retreated from a sword swing, realizing his physical strike did nothing. The young dragon roared and unleashed a range of electric orbs that shot beams of energy at the herald. As someone trained in all the elements, though he had no mastery over any of them, he was still very skilled. Lu Han clawed his way out of the rubble with a punch. He quickly eyed the herald and launched himself into the beast. His attack staggered the herald and his preceding punch forced it to take a few steps back. The herald recovered quickly and breathed waves of fire at the warrior. It then swung its blade down, barely missing Lu Han, who rolled to the side. It then kicked the man who with both hands halted the kick. Lu Han's hair was untied and flowing. Unlike his serious expression before, he was now opening smiling. He chopped the foot he held, staggering the herald, and jumped high. His hand gripped the chin of the creature and he dragged the beast with him, slamming it into the floor. The sorcerer cursed and lifted his sword to block a celestial dragon guard's swing of his halberd with his sword. His palm was open as he punched the man's armor and drained the life out of him with another. He then slammed his hand into the ground, summoning golems made of flame and shadow. "Kill them." He ordered them forwards toward the advancing celestial dragon guard. The two forces met in the middle of the rubble city unflinching. Each soldier moved at blinding speed as they fought the creatures. Natsuo growled in anger. From a distance, he pelted the herald with his blasts but discarded to target the sorcerer instead. He shot out a claw strike at the cult leader. The sorcerer, sensing danger, rolled away and fought back, blocking claw with sword. He sent a wave of shadow that rippled across the ground, throwing the dragon off balance as he prepared chains made of black shadow. Natsuo lashed out with his long tail. With the force of his entire body behind him, he knocked the sorcerer into a pile of rocks. He moved to attack further but was stopped. "What?" he cried out in shock when chains of blue fire gripped his body. Suddenly, he felt sluggish and tired. Energy drain. He bit at one of the chains and tore it apart, but a spear of fire impaled his shoulder from behind, forcing him to cry in pain. Lord Ye's battered form strolled back into Nanchen. His hand was raised, glowing in the spells he utilized. "Sorcerer! Now's your chance," he cried out. The cult leader staggered onto his feet, gripping his head in pain. He glanced at the dragon and smirked. He ran forwards with his sword prepared. "Your Highness!" Scores of celestial dragons guard cried out. They swung their halberds, breaking the heads of the creatures they fought, and raced forwards. Their chi blasts, unleashed from the swing of their weapons, halted the advancing cult leader. Lord Yi growled in annoyance. He raised his hand and bent a torrent of water into the air from beneath the guardsmen at the front. Then he arched the water forward, smashing into the men with such force that he broke the bones of a dozen celestial dragon guards. Gah! He cried out when a guard speared him with a thrown halberd and took a step back. Dozens charged forwards, having emerged victorious. The first to reach him missed his strike when Lord Yi ducked. The city lord lauded his right arm forwards to intercept the hand with the halberd, his other elbow smashed into the guard's face. Then he kicked the man into the others. "Did you all forget?" he growled. "I was also a hero of this era." The city lord clapped his palms, causing a sonic boom that threw the elite soldiers off their feet. "I fought on the front lines," he declared. "I fought demons and clashed with the strongest heroes of the other nations alike. You are nothing." He formed a massive hand from the soil that gripped over a dozen men and smashed them into the other. "Arg!" he cried out in pain again when Natsuo, who broke out of his restraints, lunged at him. The dragon caught him between his jaw and bit down. He was only able to spare his life when he forcefully held back the prince's jaw with his hands. His skin rippled in metal. The tips of his fingers burned as they burned into the dragon's mouth. His legs arched back as he kicked Natsuo away from him. "Heavenly Gate Seal!" he called out, summoning a massive gate that slammed onto the dragon from the heavens. His palms touched as 6 lights glistened across both his arms, 3 on each. "Big Dipper Northern Restraint!" he called out, manifesting 6 interconnecting stars that suppressed the dragon. "Natsuo!" Lu Han cried as he deflected the massive sword of the godly herald, who spewed profanities at the man. Just a single swing of that blade leveled many buildings and formed craters. Lu Han's leg struck down as he cracked open the blade. His fist punched into the arm of the molten giant as his ripped the entire arm off. He tensed his legs, preparing to jump for the prince. He then jumped only to stop midair when the herald caught his legs with its remaining hand. He growled as he formed a dragon claw with his palms. "Dragonic Severing!" he declared, striking the wrist of the herald. Breaking the remaining hand allowed him to kick the giant across its massive face, throwing it into the air. The next second he left it alone for Natsuo's location. In an instant, he arrived, crossing hundreds of meters away from the herald. Though the construct was still alive and regenerating, it will be some time before it can battle once more. Taking this chance, Lu Han grabbed hold of Natsuo. His fist shattered the seal, suppressing the young dragon. "Shit!" both the cult leader and Lord Yi thought in unison. The noble Lord Yi moved to grab the dragon. 1 minute his arm was outstretched, in the next, nothing was there. A swift cut from Lu Han's palm severed the mage's limb. The warrior glanced at Lord Yi coldly. "So this is the god of war of the 12 heavenly lords, huh?" His last thought echoed in his mind as Lu Han's palm flattened the top of his skull. Brain matter splattered onto the floor as the city lord of Nanchen dropped dead. The cult leader cursed. He created an orb of light and crushed it to form a massive blinding light. That was until Lu Han grabbed hold of his orb and crushed both it and his palm in one stroke. The sorcerer gritted his teeth, suppressing the cries of pain. He swung the flaming sword he had activated for Lu Han's exposed head. Lu Han snorted and reached for the blade. He was faster and could do it. But then he hesitated. All senses of his body were warning him away from the blade. His eyes narrowed as he watched the sword in slow motion. There was a supreme power about the blade. A fire both hot and powerful. It was as if the sun itself was sealed within the sword. Light. Brilliant light. Blood of God. Sacrificed. Born of sacrifice. Born of murder. Power. True power. Lu Han leaned back, letting the sorcerer go in the process. The sword arced through the air, splitting the natural gases in its wake. Strands of Lu Han's hair were sawed off as he backpedaled. "What's wrong?" Natsuo asked, coiling beside Lu Han. "Can you not see something off with that sword?" the warrior asked. "It's just a normal if magical sword, right?" The young dragon narrowed his eyes at the blade. How can a mere beast's eyes see through the enchantments of the true god? The sorcerer scoffed. He held the blade before him, glaring at the duo. Fire lit around him, dancing menacingly as he stared defiantly at the duo. Dozens more celestial dragon guards appeared on the scene. They surrounded the sorcerer cautiously with their halberds drawn. What remained of the more common jade warriors also arrived. The cult leader glanced around nervously, though he did not let it show. His co-conspirator was dead and his army had been annihilated. What's more, the herald of his god was still recovering a distance away. Natsuo's elongated body shrunk back down to a human form. He walked beside Lu Han wearily. The sorcerer pointed his blade at them, stepping back bit by bit. He was being backed into a corner until he arrived right before the corpse of Lord Yi. In the distance, the molten herald staggered onto its feet. It roared at the group in the distance. Its fire is quite hot and can damage you up close. Harass it from a distance with chi attacks and you'll be fine, Lu Han advised the celestial dragon guards. There was little strange magic the herald can perform, hence he commanded the celestial dragon guards to take care of it instead. You think a few common men can take down a herald of the true god? Laughable, the cult leader said. He slammed the sword into the pavement, kicking up a slash of red energy. Natsuo waved his hand up, forming a steel halberd from the ground. Lu Han grabbed hold of the weapon and swung it, intercepting its attack with little trouble. You're unable to use the sword to its full ability, Lu Han beeped. Even if you could, I can still beat you. You've lost Shadowland Sorcerer. For the Lord of Light. The cult leader said, charging forwards for an attack. He ignored Lu Han's words of belittlement. He did not need anything but faith on his side, all will turn out well. His flaming sword roared in even more intense flames. It struck in a beam of light that changed for Lu Han. The warrior humphed and pierced the ray of light with his new halberd, splitting it in two. He readied himself to attack, then stopped. He bowed his head and knelt on the ground. The celestial dragon guards were at first confused, then knelt as well. Even Natsuo was glancing at the sky just now, knelt. The cult leader blinked, then smirked. So you have realized the futility of your actions. You will all be a worthy sacrifice, he said, lighting up the sword in fire. He swung his right arm to unleash the flame, aiming to light a pyre. Then nothing happened. It was very quiet as things took place in an instant. An instant that felt like an eternity. His arm was simply gone. Cut off by an orange flash that appeared before him. In front of him stood a man with long blonde hair and blue eyes, giving him an incredibly unimpressed look. He wore elegant and regal orange dragon robes, and upon his head was adorned an imperial crown. His arms were folded and his long sleeves fluttered along with his robes. Naruto's glare alone quieted Nan Chen. Even the armless sorcerer could not move. In the distance, 8 dark pillars slammed into the ground around the Herald of Roller. The celestial dragon guards engaging it turned and saluted the Shadow Pan operatives. Taranju stood atop one of the pillars with his palm outstretched. The image of the 8 trigrams crashed into the screaming herald, who struggled in vain. How dare you, Naruto said slowly and calmly. His voice was full of icy wrath, promising torture beyond imagination. How dare I? How dare you? The cult leader roared. Do you understand what blasphemy you just committed? The cloud serpent belongs to Roller, to God. You should all be kneeling for his return. Roller? Naruto raised his eyebrows. It took mere moments for him to connect the names to legends he'd learned. The selfish sinner who caused the fall of the Golden Empire and unleashed the tide of chaos upon this world. Dense pressure fell onto Nan Chen in a suffocating manner. Naruto stared down the sorcerer hatefully. Of all things you worship. You worship the one person who brought chaos back to this world. And for what? Because his wife was stronger than him. 'Cause his wife said no. Lies, Roller is the true god of this land. He invoked the hero of dawn and saved this world from the others. You should be thanking him, the sorcerer spat furiously. Naruto chuckled mockingly. Even Lu Han and Natsuo looked disgusted at those declarations. How could they not when they too had been brought up on those legends? You don't even know half the things you're saying, Naruto sighed. He pointed his finger at the sorcerer preparing to cast judgment. No. The cult leader yelled. I am a chosen champion of Roller, the one true god. My destiny is to restore him to his rightful place above all gods. I have foreseen it. Yes, I have foreseen it, a gravely voice said from behind. The cult leader's eyes widened as a sword bursted from his chest, right through his heart. Lu Han, Natsuo, and the remaining celestial dragon guards looked stunned at the turn of events. Lord Ye's body had stood back up shrouded in a translucent blue light. The upper part of his head was still gone and his lower jaw just hung loosely. He was like a puppet. Naruto was also surprised. The sword was the same one the sorcerer used moments ago before Naruto amputated his right arm. City Lord of Nanchen, Yemo, Naruto said in recognition. What happened to you? He felt like kicking himself right now. It has only been a year since he was up close and personal with demons of chaos. How did he miss this one? Lord Ye's body chuckled, pulling the sword out of the body of the sorcerer. The body burnt as it did so, another offering to his god. Lord Ye's body emanated magic vastly more powerful than before. Bluish feathers spread out from his back. A blue and purple neck extended from within the base of his throat. Natsuo felt sick looking at the transformation. He held a hand over his mouth, feeling the urge to vomit. A hideous demon crawled its way from out of Lord Ye's corpse. It heavily resembled the avian demons that mountainous certain parts of Huaxia and was dense with pure magic. But it was also a confusing being. Just looking at it gave off a feeling of both dread and confusion. It was anything's yet one. Its mere appearance drove men insane with infinite possibilities. Naruto frowned at the most troublesome type of demons to deal with. A greater demon of the changer of ways. A lord of change. The end. So how was this part? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this part with your friends, and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.